Today we're going to talk about my black roughneck monitor and the way I care for her. First, let's get a good look at this thing. I love that face and that eye. Look at the skin on her. The roughneck where it gets its name. Coming down. Let's get a look at those little daggers. Yeah, they've torn some flesh before. Okay. There you go. And you don't need to see the tail. Everybody knows what the tail looks like. Here we go. First, let's talk about the lighting. Let's talk about UVB lighting. Now, there's a controversy whether monitors need a UVB lighting for the synthesis of calcium through vitamin D3. And I kind of think that you don't need a UVB light for that reason, but I give it one because they receive UVB rays in the wild. So I'm going to keep doing it. Okay, now let's go to the heat. And I have the dome with, I believe it's a 100-watt basking bulb. I forget the name of the type. Repta basking spot lamp. And that's where some controversy comes in. Let's see if I can hold this camera steady while I get this. Okay. Now, most of you have probably heard that you need 150 degrees, 130 to 150 degrees for these guys, for them to bask under. I don't agree with that. And I always wondered why it all of a sudden went from roughly 100 degrees to 130 to 150, and I think I found out why. I temp gunned this wood here, right under the basking bulb, and it temp gunned at 125 one day, and I'm thinking that's where they're getting that from. But I also temp the monitor, and the monitor on the back where it hits, that was 100 degrees. I also temped a shiny piece of newspaper, like the sales section you get in the newspaper. It temp gunned at 135. So basically, temp gunning the spot where your bulb is hitting is pretty much useless except for when it's on the monitor. So let's see if I want to zap the spot here on the monitor. That's not roughly it. Okay, we're getting 103. Let me see. Well, I hope you saw that before it went blank. Now, this is why I say that you need to let the monitor bask. For a monitor this size, I think about 40 minutes is proper. Let's see what we get when we do this. That's roughly the midsection. And there we got a temp of 99. I don't know if you guys can see that. Probably not. Let me do that again. Oh, my hand's shaking pretty bad. Hold on. Okay. Alright, let's try something different here. Alright, the midsection, about where the light is. Yeah, they were getting 98. Hope you guys can see that. It's pretty blurry. Anyways, that said 98. Now we're going to take a shot down here towards the bottom. And here we're getting 89. There you go. Okay. So that shows you that it takes time for the heat to penetrate down to the gut, down here on the bottom. So that's what I like to do, is when I consider the basking spot is the 103 degrees, right around 100 degrees. Now if I jump it up to where it's 120 surface temperature on his skin, he won't get under it. He stays around the rim of it, and he will temp gun at only 85 degrees roughly, so he's not getting the basking temperature. So by providing over 120 degrees for this monitor, and actually it's a she, I've been calling him a him, 120 degrees, he won't bask under it. Therefore, given that hot of a basking temperature, it causes him not to bask and get to an even lower temperature. So I don't agree with these 130 to 150 degrees, but I understand how they're getting them. But I think they're very misleading, and you should temp the monitor skin. Now, if you don't have a temperature measuring device, that's okay. Actually, that might even be better. What you want to do is provide a temperature that you notice the monitor. Like I say, a monitor this size is probably 30 to 40 minutes. I like 40 minutes. Okay. You want it to get directly under the basking bulb. You want it to stay there, like I said, for 40 minutes. Then you want it to thermoregulate over here to a cooler spot, and then eventually come back. As long as you're seeing this monitor thermoregulate, stay under there for a good amount of time, then you're pretty sure that the guy's getting warm enough. The monitor knows what the monitor needs. The monitor is the expert. Okay, so now let's go over here to the water. Now these monitors, I've heard, and I believe it, but I kind of don't like to say anything unless I have first-hand experience. They'll soak for 24 hours. I've had this monitor soak for up to 2 days straight. Now that temperature in the winter, the water temperature, it'll drop down to 69 or 70 degrees. That's okay. A lot of people tell you that's too cold and you risk respiratory infections. Well, you kind of do if they can't warm up. And that also reinforces that you need to let your monitor stay there and bask quite a while. So just remember that. As far as humidity goes for these guys, I've heard some pretty high humidity, 65 to even 90% humidity. For this guy, for probably 4 years, all I did was spray twice in the winter. In the summer, sometimes I would spray once every other day, sometimes not. Now, I know that got nowhere near 65 to 95%, but the monitor's urates were nice and white. I didn't notice any other signs of dehydration. And these I just want to mention, you can't really go by stock shed because these guys are in constant shed. It's kind of frustrating, you know. You can never get them looking totally beautiful. But anyways, that's all I did was I sprayed twice a day in the winter. Now, when this thing was small for about 4 years, this tree over here actually had leaves. It actually had a lot more branches. This guy has torn up this stuff. I had vines hanging up all around here. So I had things that kept the humidity for longer and it kept it higher. But as the monitor grew, she destroys it. And anything I put in there, she destroys. So now I use a rectifogger because she's torn everything up. And I really haven't noticed that much of a difference using the rectifogger. I know it keeps the humidity up a lot higher because I can stick my hand in there and I feel the difference. So I would suggest once they get to the size where they start tearing up the furniture, use the rectifogger. I've run a whole bottle of water through there just once a day, and that's all I do. And I still spray twice a day. And when I do spray, I spray the monitor. Now, for humidity, I also have down here cypress mulch that I use, and that's supposed to be really good for holding humidity. But this cage is 4 foot tall, and this monitor is usually up here because that's where her basking spot is. So I don't think that really affects her very much at all until she gets down. Now, for feeding, I fed this thing for 8 years. Well, I've had this thing 8.5 years, and she's probably about 9 years old. Now, for that 8.5 years, I've fed it nothing but mice. And a lot of people say that's really bad for them. That's really going to get them overweight. And I really don't agree with that. I talked to 2 different reptile vets, and they both said that mice were a very balanced diet as long as they were fed properly, brought up right, and that I could use that as a staple. I went a step further, and that's all I've ever fed this thing for a little over 8.5 years. I did the math, and 8 years is 1,432 mice. That's quite a bit of mice. Now, I was feeding her every other day because when I first got her, she was like 6 months old. And I wanted her to have the vitamins and minerals. She's growing faster, you know, because she's young. So I sat there and I was feeding it every other day. Well, I kept that schedule up like a dummy for 8 years. And I believe she's a little bit, well, more than a little bit overweight. You can't really tell it by the tail. The tail looks good. Get down here to the midsection. I wish that light didn't put such a glare on it. But that's where I think she's getting a little chunky. Well, now I feed her just when she's roaming, when I notice her roaming. And sometimes that's as long as 5 days in between meals. But a lot of that is because of this water. She'll soak for sometimes a day, 2 days straight. And like I said, the water gets down to 70 degrees, so digestion is slowed a whole lot. And that's the way I take care of my black roughneck monitor. And I think this thing is in awesome shape, other than being maybe a little overweight. And I'm working on that. Like I say, she's 8.5 years old. Excuse me. According to websites I find, they say they live anywhere from 10 to 20 plus years. To me, that basically says they have no idea how long they live. So this thing could either be a senior citizen or it could be going through its midlife crisis. Don't know which, but either way, like I say, the care I've given this monitor is controversial, but this is what's worked for me, and it's worked for 8.5 years, and I'm going to continue doing it because I believe this is a very healthy monitor. You guys have a good day.